My sister got pregnant and took my room. My parents sent me away. 10 years later, they called not to apologize but because they needed me. It all started when I was 14. My sister Lena, who was 17 years old at the time and is now 27, has always been the golden child in our family. Our parents, Dad, 45, male, and Mom, 43, female, essentially worshipped the ground she walked on. But things took a turn for the worst when Lena revealed she was expecting her loser boyfriend Zane's 19th child. You'd think my parents would be mad, right? Nope. Mom hugged her and began weeping about how she was going to be a young grandmother and how fortunate our family was. Meanwhile, Dad just sat there staring at his plate, not saying anything. This is a classic dad maneuver. He has never stood up to Mom. I recall sitting at the dinner table with my jaw hanging open. So, are you kidding me? If I had told them I got a girl pregnant at 14, they would have definitely sent me to military school or something. Lena, however, receives a hug and congrats. That pretty much describes my entire childhood. Lena has always been the golden child. When I received a C in math last semester, I lost my gaming privileges for a month. Lena failed 2 classes last year, and her mother stated she was going through a difficult time emotionally, so she purchased her a new phone to cheer her up. The double standards in this household are crazy. I could write a friggin' novel about all the times she received preferential treatment, but I'll spare you the details. Zane, this guy is the epitome of a deadbeat. He's been dismissed from about 4 jobs in the last year. Last Christmas he showed up with a gift for Lena that still had the security tag attached. We all pretended not to notice, but come on buddy, he shows up uninvited at our house, raids the fridge, and talks to my parents as if they owe him anything. He has a silly neck tattoo that says, "No regrets," which is ironic given his lifestyle choices, and he drives a beat-up Honda that makes the entire street smell like burning oil. Zane first came over for supper around 3 months before the pregnancy announcement. I recall him bragging about how he did not believe in college because entrepreneurs do not require degrees. Meanwhile, this person was genuinely working at a car wash while living in his mother's basement. But my folks merely nodded along, as if he were imparting knowledge or something. Dad would periodically give me a look that indicated, "Is this guy for real?" But he never said anything. I attempted to warn my folks about Zane once. I overheard him on the phone in our garden discussing how he had been tossed out of his former girlfriend's home for using her father's credit card. When I told my mother, she simply remarked, "People deserve second chances, honey. Zane is going through a rough patch." A rough patch that seemed to have lasted his entire life. Growing up as the less favored child causes you to distrust yourself. For years I worried if I was simply dreaming things. Perhaps I was the problem. Maybe if I were more like Lena, vivacious, popular and attractive, my parents would treat me the same. I tried so hard to catch their attention. I received good grades, kept my room neat, and even joined activities that I believed would please them. Nothing worked. Lena could burn down the house and they would most likely blame it on defective wiring. I recall this happening when I was 12 and Lena was 15. We had 2 activities on the same night. My scientific fair and her choir concert. Guess which one my folks attended? Yep. They went to see Lena sing one line in a group number while I stood alone next to my renewable energy project, which had taken weeks to construct. My teacher kept asking where my parents were, and I simply claimed they were stopped in traffic. They didn't even bother to stop by afterwards. I won second place, by the way. They never knew or cared. About a week after the baby announcement, my mother held a family gathering, which I knew meant awful news for me. Lena arrived 20 minutes late as usual, complaining about her back pain from carrying a human life. Mom instantly sprang up to buy her a special pregnancy cushion, and I just rolled my eyes. They made us all sit in the living room, with Mom and Dad on the big couch, Lena on the love seat, and me in the dining room's awful wooden chair. Yes, even the sitting arrangements in our house were a metaphor for my position in the family hierarchy. Then they dropped the bomb. They needed to reconsider our living arrangements now that the baby was on the way. Basically, I was being sent to live with my grandparents in Florida so Lena could use my room as a nursery. "It's only temporary," Mom murmured, without looking me in the eye. "Lena needs our support system right now." I looked at Dad, thinking he would say anything to protect me. He simply whispered, "It'll be good for you to spend time with Grandpa and Grandma. They have a nice pool. Like a freaking pool compensates for being evicted from my own home." Lena had the audacity to say, "You should be grateful. At least you don't have to deal with midnight feedings and diaper smell." Then she chuckled and added, "Plus, I've always wanted your room. It gets better sunlight for the baby." I remember sitting there utterly startled. They were talking about my entire future as if I weren't even in the room. as if I were some piece of furniture that could be moved whenever it got inconvenient. I was waiting for someone to remark, "Just kidding," or give an alternative, but it never came. "When exactly am I supposed to leave?" I finally inquired, my voice cracking awkwardly. "Well," Mom began, checking her phone calendar. "Grandma and Grandpa said you could come anytime, but we thought maybe after the school year ends. That gives you about 6 weeks to say goodbye to your friends." 6 weeks. Like it was a generous time frame to fully uproot my life. I spent my entire life in our town. All of my buddies were present. My school, my teachers, the comic book store where I spent weekends, and the park where I was just getting good at skateboarding. Everything I knew was here. "Do I get any say in this?" I inquired, already knowing the answer. "Honey," Mom murmured in that faux compassion tone she uses when trying to care. "Sometimes families have to make tough decisions. This is what's best for everyone." "Everyone except me," I was saying. "Don't be so dramatic," Lena murmured, rolling her eyes. "It's not like being sent to prison. Florida has beaches and stuff." I can still recall the exact moment when I realized I was entirely disposable to my family. It was when my mother mentioned that they'd repaint my room, which I'd only gotten to paint dark blue last year after begging for weeks, to a bright cheery yellow for the baby. She was already deciding which of my posters to take down and where the crib would go, all while I sat right there. "But what about my school, my friends, the soccer team tryouts?" I inquired, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "You'll make new friends," Mom dismissively stated. "And Florida schools are probably better anyway." I stared at Lena, hoping for some indication that she felt horrible about the whole thing. She was texting someone and not paying attention to the talk that was truly changing my life. When she eventually looked up, she simply asked, "Can we wrap this up? I'm meeting Zane for dinner." That night, I closed myself inside my room and cried for the first time in years. No one seemed to notice or care. The following few weeks were horrible. Lena began carrying baby supplies into my room before I had even packed. She and her mother went shopping for baby clothing while I was informed we needed to budget when I requested new sneakers for Florida. When I got home from school one day, I saw that my bookshelf had been emptied, with all of my books put into cardboard boxes in the hall. When I inquired what was going on, my mother answered, "Oh, we need the shelf for the baby's things. You weren't taking those books to Florida anyway, right? We'll store them in the attic." Those books were my escape. I'd been saving for years, buying them at yard sales and the used bookstore downtown. Some have comments in the margin, little thoughts I had while reading, and now they were being packed away as if they, and I, mattered nothing. Zane began sticking around more, acting as if he owned our house. One day I saw him wearing my favorite Bulls hoodie. When I confronted him, he simply shrugged and said, "Chill, little man. You won't need warm clothes in Florida anyway." I wanted to slap him so badly. The worst part was that my mother watched what happened and said nothing. Actually, this is not true. She urged me to quit making a fuss when I requested my hoodie back. Zane simply smirked behind her back. I never received that hoodie back, by the way. He probably sold it or lost it somewhere. Things simply got worse. My mom and Lena began having conversations about the baby right in front of me, as if I were invisible. They discussed converting my work area into a changing station or removing my bed to make room for the crib, eradicating all evidence of my presence in that location. I tried to explain what was going on to my pals, but they didn't seem to understand. The majority of them thought moving to Florida sounded good. "Dude, you'll live right by the beach. Or perhaps you'll see an alligator." They didn't realize I was effectively being booted out of my own family. My best friend Liam was the only one who seemed to understand how messed up things were. "That's some serious man," he remarked when I told him, "They can't just ship you off because your sister got knocked up. That's not your fault." It felt good to have someone acknowledge what I was feeling, but it didn't alter anything. I was still being sent away, and no one who could do anything about it seemed concerned. I tried to chat to Dad alone one night when he was organizing his tools in the garage. "Dad, this is not fair. Why do I need to leave? Why can't Lena and Zane have their own place?" Dad only sighed and appeared fatigued. "Sometimes we have to make sacrifices as a family. Your mother thinks this is best for everyone." "But what are your thoughts?" I pressed. He simply shook his head. "What I think doesn't really matter around here, son. You are aware of this." I noticed something in his eyes that night. This dejected expression made me understand he'd stopped fighting my mother years ago. Maybe even before I was born, I was terrified of my future if I stayed in this toxic environment. I made one last-ditch effort to stay. I went to my guidance counselor at school and explained the problem, thinking that she could speak with my parents or something. She was concerned and invited them in for a meeting. But of course, my mother just put on her perfect parent act, telling me how wonderful it was for me to bond with my grandparents and how they were making this sacrifice as a family. The counselor agreed wholeheartedly. As we left her office, Mom hugged my shoulder so hard it hurt and murmured, "Don't ever try to embarrass this family again." The last straw was overhearing Lena on the phone with a friend. She was laughing and saying, "Yeah, it's perfect. The brat is getting shipped off, so the baby gets a whole nursery. Mom has already promised to help with night feedings, so I can still hang out sometimes." That's when I realized I was just an inconvenience to them, a problem they could solve by sending me away. To Lena, I wasn't a sibling whose life was being uprooted. I was just the brat who got in the way of her ideal little setting. The day before my departure, I went to visit my old treehouse in the woods behind our neighborhood. When I was 7 years old, my dad and I built it together. One of the rare occasions that he genuinely spent quality time with me. It wasn't fancy, just plywood and 2x4s, but it had been my particular haven for years. I hadn't been up there in a long time, and I'd outgrown it, but it suddenly felt vital to go one final time. When I arrived, I discovered that someone had taken down the ladder and sprayed Zane was here across the front. The small window was broken, and there were beer cans and cigarette butts inside. I stayed there for hours, staring at this emblem of my youth that had been invaded and destroyed, just like everything else in my life. Nobody made a special dinner for me on my last night at home. Mom was helping Lena register for baby items online. Dad watched television in silence. I purchased a pizza with my own money and ate it alone in my almost empty room, sitting on the floor because my bed had already been disassembled to make place for the crib that had arrived that morning. So, when I was 14, I relocated to Florida to live with my grandparents, just before beginning high school. It wasn't too bad living with my 68-year-old grandmother and 70-year-old grandfather. They treated me much better than my own parents did. However, attending high school in a new state where I knew almost no one was a huge disaster. I was the new kid with an unusual accent. Apparently, I have a northern accent in Florida. On my first day of school, a student asked me where I was from and why I had moved. When I explained that my pregnant sister needed my room, he looked at me as if I had a second head. "Dude, that is messed up," he stated. It was the first time anyone acknowledged that what had occurred to me was not normal or acceptable. I almost cried right there in the cafeteria. The first month was tough. I remained to myself, mostly having lunch alone and returning home directly from school. Grandma would have food available and ask about my day, not just how school went in general, but about my classes and teachers specifically. It was strange to have an adult take an interest in my life. One afternoon, I completely broke down while doing schoolwork at the kitchen table. I started bawling out of nowhere. Grandma sat with me, not saying anything but caressing my back till I could breathe again. Then she said something that I will never forget. "What your parents did was wrong, and you are entitled to be furious about it. But, do not let that anger consume everything good within you." Grandpa was also cool. He had a workshop in the garage where he constructed furniture, and he began showing me how to use the tools. He remarked my hands were good for intricate work. It was the first time I had been complimented on my physical abilities. Dad had never bothered to teach me those stuff. My first DIY project was a basic wooden box with dovetail joints. Grandpa exhibited it on the mantel as if it were a treasured artifact. He proudly displayed it to everyone who came over, telling about how his grandson had made it. I feigned to be embarrassed, but it felt great to have someone proud of me. I rarely heard from my folks back home. Mom would call once a month, make awkward small chat, and then spend 20 minutes showing me images of Lena's baby child, Sophie, on FaceTime. Dad would come on for a minute at the end and say, "Be good to your grandparents," before hanging up. Lena only called or texted when she needed anything. Lena initially called me personally around 3 months after I moved. I was truly thrilled to see her name on my phone. Perhaps she missed me. Nope. She wanted me to persuade grandmother and grandfather to send a larger check for the baby's christening gift. I hung up with her. For my 15th birthday, my parents sent me a card that came 3 days late. Inside, there was a $25 iTunes gift card and a bland letter. Not even, "We miss you." Grandma and Grandpa, on the other hand, threw me a real party with handmade cake and went me to get a good laptop for school. The contrast could not have been clearer. Slowly I began to adjust to my new existence. I joined the computer club at school and met some nice folks who didn't mind that I was the new kid. Jaden, a neighbor of my grandparents, and I began to hang around. His parents divorced and he spent time in both families, so he understood what it was like to be caught up in family turmoil. I learned I was actually rather excellent with computers. My new laptop has become my addiction. I taught myself basic programming, how to debug hardware difficulties, and even some graphic design. Grandpa recognized my fascination and began bringing home broken devices from yard sales for me to experiment with. He'd wink and add, "Either you'll fix it, or it's already broken, so no harm done." When I turned 16, I worked hard in school, received straight A's, joined a computer club, and started working part-time at the local Best Buy. Grandpa taught me about saving and investing. I saved every penny I could. I had a plan in the works to never rely on my parents again. To never be in a position where they could just dispose of me when I became inconvenient. Working for Best Buy was a big changer. Not only did I make good money, but I also learned a lot about different technologies and how to communicate with clients. My manager, Rick, took me under his wing and began assigning me increasingly difficult repair work. "Kids have a talent for discovering problems," he'd tell the other staff. For the first time, I felt valued for my abilities. By junior year, I had made some excellent friends, joined the track team, and began dating a lady named Chloe. She relocated to California for college, but we remained friends. Life was normal. Sometimes I went weeks without thinking about my parents or Lena. The pain never totally went away, but it progressed from a violent stab to a dull ache. I returned home once during my junior year. It was Thanksgiving, and Grandma demanded that we all spend it together. The visit was eye-opening. My former room was completely altered. Pink walls, crib and changing table. There was no trace that I had ever lived there. Lena lived at home with Sophie, who was then a toddler. Zane was in between jobs, as usual, and spent the entire time I was there playing video games. The craziest thing was how they all pretended nothing had occurred. For me, being sent away was just another routine thing that families did. Mom started saying stuff like, "Oh, we should show you the mall they've renovated since you lived here." As if I'd just been gone at camp or something. Dad felt a little better. He did apologize one night while we were alone, claiming he should have handled things better. However, it was too little, too late. I couldn't wait to return to Florida after that visit. It made me realize that my grandparents' house had become more like a home than my parents had ever been. My parents flew down to see my high school graduation at the age of 18. It was awkward as hell. They pretended that the previous 4 years hadn't happened. Mom kept showing my grandparents' friends pictures of Sophie, who was now 4, and discussing how Lena was such an outstanding young mother despite her difficulties. By the way, challenges refer to the results of her own choices. Zane, for example, moved out when Sophie was 6 months old, then back in, then out again, a pattern he'd repeat nearly a dozen times throughout the years. Or how she was dismissed from 3 different retail jobs for repeatedly phoning in sick. Translation: hung drunk. But in my mother's perspective, Lena was still this poor, struggling angel who deserved constant support and admiration for performing the fundamental parenting that millions of people do every day. At the graduation banquet, I stated that I was not returning home. I was staying in Florida, buying my own house, and launching my own computer repair business. Mom appeared astonished. Dad simply nodded, as if he knew what was coming all along. "But you don't want to come home?" Mom inquired, puzzled. "Your room is still there." It was no longer my room. It was Sophie's room, which I had seen in the background of numerous video conversations. "No," I answered simply. "My home is here now." The hurt expression on her face almost made me giggle. What was she expecting? That I would be glad to return to the location where I had been discarded like old furniture? That I'd like to live as a visitor in what was once my home? Later that night, Grandpa drew me aside and pressed a $5,000 check into my palm. "Seed money," he termed it. "For your business. Don't tell your grandmother. She thinks we're just helping with first month's rent on your apartment." He gave me a wink and said, "I believe in you, kid." That night, I came to a crucial realization. Family is more than simply blood. It's the individuals that create room for you in their lives, recognize your worth, and believe in you. By that measure, my grandparents were more like family to me than my parents and sister ever were. From the ages of 18 to 24, I built my computer repair business from scratch into a reputable IT consulting firm. I've got my own condo, a new car, and actual savings. Not wealthy by any means, but stable and independent. Those first few years on my own were challenging. I resided in a little studio apartment that smelled like the Indian restaurant downstairs. I worked long hours doing repairs during the day, taking online classes to become certified in various systems at night, and cold calling businesses on weekends to offer my services. Ramen became a food group. Sleep becomes optional. At first I was simply maintaining people's personal computers, eradicating viruses, upgrading hardware, and recovering lost data. I charged less than the big repair companies, so I earned a lot of business from word of mouth. I'd make house calls on my bike, carrying my toolkit in my backpack because I couldn't afford a car at the time. My big break came when I assisted the proprietor of a local accounting firm in recovering data from what they believed to be a fried server. A large IT company offered them thousands of dollars for the job. I fixed it in one afternoon for a few $100s. The owner was so satisfied that he hired me on a monthly retainer to handle all of their IT issues. That was my first actual business contract. Things slowly began to come together. Word of mouth spread. A satisfied consumer would suggest me to another. I hired my first employee at the age of 20, a community college student who was familiar with networks. By the age of 22, I had an actual office space and 3 staff. Now I have a team of 5 people, including a full-time office manager who handles everything I dislike doing. The best thing about starting my own business wasn't the money. It was the control. For the first time in my life, I was making my own decisions and establishing my own rules. Nobody could ship me off, steal my room, or tell me I wasn't important. I was creating something entirely unique to me. Meanwhile, from what I heard, Lena, now 27, was still living at home with Sophie, age 10. She dropped out of community college after 1 semester due to the demands of having a child. Zane had been in and out of their lives, frequently borrowing money and vanishing for months at a time. Every now and again I'd get updates through holiday cards or the rare phone call from Dad. Zane apparently got another girl pregnant when Sophie was 3, causing some trouble for a period. Then he spent a few months in jail for driving with a suspended license and an unlicensed pistol in the car. Zane is a quality man. Lena had a habit of acquiring jobs and then resigning or being fired within a few months: retail, waitressing, and receptionist. Nothing ever stuck. She was continually making excuses. The manager was harsh. The hours were excessively long. Customers were rude. But based on Dad's thoughtful comments, the true issue was that she simply did not want to work. Why should she? When my folks arrived to bail her out. On Sophie's 7th birthday, I sent her a tablet filled with educational games and e-books. It was certainly more expensive than I should have spent, but I wanted her to have something special. A few days later I received a text from Lena with a photo of Sophie holding the tablet, but the message was simply, she says, "Thanks for the iPad." It wasn't even an iPad, but whatever. Lena did not express a personal thank you, nor did she acknowledge the work I had done to select age-appropriate information. Just the bare minimum. I tried not to let it affect me, but it did. Not because I desired thanks, but because it demonstrated that nothing had changed. Lena remained the same selfish person she had always been, and my parents continued to enable her conduct. My parents, now 53 and 55, were primarily raising Sophie, while Lena worked part-time at a nail salon and socialized with friends. Mom was still making excuses for her, describing her as a young, free spirit who needed time to discover herself. On the rare occasions when we spoke, Dad sounded increasingly exhausted. The last time we spoke, Dad said that he was postponing his retirement because they were still assisting Lena in getting on her feet. He was 55 years old at the time, suffering from back pain and high blood pressure. Instead of supporting his almost 30-year-old daughter and grandchild, he might have considered retiring. I maintained little contact. Christmas cards and birthday texts, that's all. Every year I sent Sophie birthday and Christmas gifts, which were mainly books or educational toys. I had never met her in person, which was strange to think about. I have a niece who I had only seen through screens. Grandma and Grandpa continued to be my primary sources of support. They never treated me like a burden or an afterthought. Grandpa died 2 years ago of a heart attack while sleeping peacefully, and it affected me more than anything I'd felt about my immediate family in years. I still contact Grandma twice a week and go to Sunday supper whenever I can. The day of Grandpa's funeral was one of the hardest days of my life. My parents came down, but Lena did not. She said she couldn't get a sitter for Sophie, which was silly because my parents could have looked after her. The truth was that she didn't want to make the effort. My grandfather, who had essentially saved me when my own family abandoned me, wasn't worth the 6-hour travel to her. At the funeral, my mother tried to make it about her by crying and telling everyone how amazing her father had been, as if she hadn't contacted or seen him in a decade. Dad appeared to be truly heartbroken, and was extremely helpful with the practical arrangements, which I greatly appreciated. After the funeral, I overheard Mom telling one of Grandma's friends that they were concerned about how I was dealing with the loss and had offered to have me stay with them for a bit, which was a complete lie. They had done nothing of the sort. That was Mom for you. Always act for an audience. On my 23rd birthday, Lena sent me a text that simply said, "Happy B-Day, bro." No capitalization, not even my name. I hadn't heard from her for over a year. About an hour later she texted again, asking if I could lend her $800 for auto repairs. I ignored it. She sent 3 more messages over the next week, each one becoming increasingly guilt-ridden, until the final one accused me of leaving the family and not caring about my niece's safety because she needed a reliable car to bring Sophie to school. I eventually responded, "Ask Zane or Mom and Dad. They're your support system, remember?" She didn't text again after that. That is the trouble with folks like Lena. They only recall your existence when they require something from you. 10 years of essentially no communication, and now I'm expected to hand over money because we're family. The audacity was nearly astounding. Meanwhile, I was creating a life that I was proud of. My business was expanding steadily. I had nice pals and dated occasionally. Nothing significant, but not for lack of effort. I was happy, genuinely joyful, in a manner I hadn't been as a kid. Sometimes I imagine a parallel universe in which my parents stood up to Lena and forced her and Zane to figure out their own living arrangement rather than sending me away. Will I be the same person? Would I have established a similar life? It's impossible to tell for sure, but part of me believes that being forced to rely on myself at such an early age made me stronger and more determined. It is not a silver lining I would want on anyone else, but it is something I have accepted. On a Tuesday afternoon, my phone unexpectedly called with Mom's number. I almost didn't respond, but I figured it could be crucial. "Your sister was in a car accident," Mom explained, her voice quivering. "She's okay, but she broke her leg in 3 places and fractured her hip. The doctors say she can't work for at least 6 to 8 months." I waited because I knew there was more to come. "Zane left for good. He said he couldn't handle the pressure and moved to California with some girl he met online. We're struggling with the medical bills and taking care of Sophie. Your father's hours got cut back at work and my arthritis is getting worse." Her tone waned and she spoke slowly. "We were hoping you could come to visit, reunite with the family, and meet Sophie properly. Your father deeply misses you." Translation: the precious kid has passed away. Her deadbeat baby daddy has left her for good. They suddenly remembered that they had another child who could be useful. After hanging up, I sat there for quite some time, staring at my phone. 10 years. It had taken 10 years and a financial crisis for them to reach out in any significant way. Not because they missed me or regretted their actions, but because they needed something from me. Part of me wanted to ignore the call, but then I remembered Sophie, a 10-year-old child caught up in all of this adult drama. None of it was her fault. And to be entirely honest, a small part of me wished they could see who I would become without them. I wanted them to realize that the kid they'd abandoned had established a life for himself that they now needed to rely on. So I called Mom back and said I'd come see in a few weeks. I hired a motel instead of staying at their place. There was no way I was sleeping on their couch, or in what used to be my room. Walking inside my former residence seemed strange. The walls were covered in family photos, the majority of which featured Sophie at various ages with Lena and my parents. I realized there were just 2 images of me. My high school graduation, and an ancient school picture from when I was approximately 12. My old bedroom had been transformed into a princess-themed children's room, complete with pink walls and unicorn bedding. Lena sat on the couch, leg in a cast, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up as I walked in. "Oh, you actually came," she remarked, shocked that I was bothered. Mom lingered around uneasily, while Dad held me tightly and muttered, "I've missed you," into my ear. He appears to be considerably older and more worn out. When Sophie returned home from school, things changed. She was bright and curious, with none of Lena's demeanor. After a timid start, she lighted up when she discovered I worked with computers and inundated me with questions about coding and gaming. That night, after Sophie went to bed, they finally got to the topic. They were inundated with medical costs. Lena couldn't work. Zane was gone. They were overdue on both the mortgage and Sophie's private school tuition. "We understand it's a lot to ask," Mom added. "But you're doing so well in business. We were hoping you would be able to help us." Lena finally seemed interested in my existence. "Yeah, bro. Must be nice having all that freedom and money." I looked around at everyone. My entitled sister, who has never faced consequences. My enabling mother, who always placed herself first. And my meek father, who never stood up for me but appeared truly regretful. "I'll help," I finally said. Mom erupted into tears of relief. "But I have conditions," I explained. "I'm not giving anybody a blank check. I'll pay for Sophie's basic expenses and medical bills directly to the providers, not to any of you. And the money goes through Dad, not either of you," I stated, glaring at Lena and Mom. Lena's smile disappeared. "What? You don't trust us or something?" No, actually, I don't. Mom was upset, but Dad simply nodded, perfectly understanding. That's fair, Dad replied. You have no reason to trust us. I also made Lena participate in job training once she was physically capable. She stormed out, but Dad astonished me by admitting that it was more than reasonable. Dad followed me out to my car that night. I should have stood up for you back then, he whispered quietly. It was easier to just go along with your mother and Lena. I've regretted it every day since you left. I did not reply. I wasn't ready to forgive him yet, but I did appreciate the admission. Take care of Sophie, I instructed. She deserves better than all this drama. As I drove back to my hotel, I realized I no longer hated them. I simply felt sad for them. They had caused this disaster via their favoritism and enabling, and now they were living in it. Meanwhile, I was free. The neglected son who created himself out of nothing. Perhaps eventually I'll have a meaningful relationship with Sophie. Perhaps even with Dad. But for the time being, their recognition that they needed me after years of making me feel useless was sufficient. Edit. Wow, I appreciate all of the prizes and compliments. To clarify the timeline, I am now 24. I was 14 when I was transported to Florida. Lena was 17 when she became pregnant, and she is now 27 with a 10-year-old daughter. Edit 2. Some people have asked for updates. Yes, I am still helping Sophie with her expenditures, but solely through my father. Lena is still not working, despite physicians clearing her months ago. She's been looking into online programs for about 6 months now. My mother still makes excuses for her. The good news is that I'm starting a relationship with Sophie. We video chat once a week and discuss literature and coding. She's really intelligent, and I'm trying to be the person I needed when I was her age. Edit 3. To some who suggest I should just cut them all off totally, I understand. Believe me. But Sophie is innocent in all of this, and I do not want to punish her for her mother's faults. And no, I did not go back. I see Sophie and Dad on occasion, but my life is now in Florida. Edit 4. Thank you for your wonderful remarks and messages. This blew up much more than I imagined. To some who have asked if I would take Sophie if my parents died, absolutely. She deserves a chance to live a regular life. To everyone who has shared similar stories, I'm sorry you went through it and hope you find peace, as I am. Edit 5. Final update, because this is growing huge. Many of you have asked if my grandmother is aware that I am financially assisting my parents. Yes, she knows and supports my decision to assist Sophie, but she has some harsh comments for my sister that I will not repeat here. Grandma is a wise woman who taught me that being the bigger person doesn't always mean allowing others to walk all over you. It entails setting boundaries while also doing the right thing. I miss you, Grandpa.